on. Thank you very much, Vicki. And if you need at any point a little support on the annotation, we can certainly do that for you again. I would like to quickly ask you to complete a poll. This session is really about flavors. So flavors of instruction, but let's start with flavors of ice cream because we're in the middle of winter and who doesn't want to talk about ice cream? And then the second question is also to help me know when we do some of our tasks, how much support you're going to need. So if you could fill those two polls in. We have about half of our group responding, so we get the rest of you guys responding. That'll be great. We're at 80%. Can I get 100%? Almost there. Okay, well, that's a minute on the poll, and that's as much as I'm willing to spend. I imagine you feel the same. So let's share those results with you. And you can see that there's this three-way tie for vanilla, chocolate, and Neapolitan. So that pretty much tells me that I have to address all the flavors of ice cream. But you all like ice cream. Maybe the one person who didn't vote didn't want to admit to not liking ice cream. And then I see that a lot of you have not used Google Slides in your virtual classrooms. We're going to use that quite a bit today. So it may take, the first time we do it, it may be a process, but I'm sure by the end of the session, you'll feel very comfortable. It's a great way for participants for your students to get a different modality in, and also a lot of sharing and collaboration. So in the land of slide sharing, here we go. So we're going to actually move right into the idea of working with a Google Slide, but I'm going to have you reflect with these three questions. I want you to just take about 30 seconds and read those three questions to yourself and consider which of these questions you most want to respond to. Now I've put a link in the chat. And what's going to happen is that you're going to go to that link, which will be Google Slides, and they'll look like this. You'll see something that looks like this. And what you'll do is select one of the slides that has the question that you decided you'd like to answer, but you're also going to upload an image. So for example, if I decided that I wanted to answer the question in general, how do I prefer to work on a project? I came up with the word collaborate, and then I looked for an image and I can look for an image easily through the Google Slides, or you can just use your own Google search. And I just posted that onto the board. I pasted it onto the board, and you use your text box. It's just like PowerPoint in terms of the tools. Use your text box, or you can insert an image that way. You can also answer the question in general, what would you say is your strongest intelligence? And I took the test yesterday, and I did not actually, I scored mathematical logical, which is very surprising to me. But this is what I thought. And then if you want to answer the question in general, what would you say is your weakest intelligence? Body kinesthetic is what I came up with for mine. So I'm going to give you guys about 4 minutes. I'm going to flip back here for a second. You'll have 4 minutes for this task. And if you finish early, you can just scroll through the slides to see what people said. Now, if you don't remember what intelligences are based on Howard Gardner's work, which you may or may not know, their last slide lists them for you. And if you'd rather not answer that question, you can just answer this one. So you just answer one question, put in your word, and put in your image and your name. What questions do you have for me about this task? You can turn on your mic and ask me, or you can type it in the chat. I can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, plus 5, 10 of you are on here, which is great. It means that 6 of you are not. So if you're on a phone and you haven't been able to easily get to these slides, which could be an issue for some students, feel free to write your answer in the chat and then give me a link to an image, and I will go ahead and put that up for you. And feel free to turn on your mic and ask me a question if you need some support. Okay, the anonymous narwhal has written teamwork. Be sure to type your name in there too, so that you're not always known as narwhal. There's Linda. Okay, I'm going to help you by moving that down. There you go. Now, if you're having trouble with the idea of how to get an image, you click on Insert Image, and then you click on Search the Web, and you get a box that allows you to search for. So, for example, if Brenda's saying teamwork and she wants a picture of teamwork, they come up here, and she double clicks on that, and then she can add it. So that was under Insert Picture. There you go. So Anonymous Chameleon, the beautiful teal anonymous chameleon. You would want to put that not in the notes, but you'd want to put your information up here on the slide. So you can paste alone and put it up into a text box, and the text box is in the T. Perfect. And Doreen, can you look for an image that will epitomize alone? And then you can just bring that image down in size, the wonderful image of the light bulbs, exactly. Okay, so for those of you that are on the phone, you can do it by going to the Google slide, but it is much more challenging. So I think it's great that you're giving me the information in the chat. So Anna, can you just change what you wrote and not make it just to me, but make it to everyone? And we're going to end this activity in 1 more minute. So I'm going to help whoever put the large picture. I just made it smaller for you so that, and you can place it wherever you want. And to get an image, Anna, you would just go on your phone to the app for Google Chrome or Safari and search Google Images. Thank you, Trudy. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Gemma. Okay, we're gonna close down this activity and do some reflection. So what I would love for you to do, if you don't mind, is turn on your camera. And then I'll have you turn on your mic when to answer these questions. So what was most satisfying about this activity? What was least satisfying about it? Trudy, I see that your mic is off. Trudy, do you want to answer? Okay, Trudy, I'll come back to you. Anna, do you have an answer for what was most or least satisfying about the activity?
Least satisfying was not being able to figure out how to get a picture up there. Most satisfying. Well, there were a lot of options, so that was nice.
Okay, thank you. Dana, do you have a response?
Sure. I think the least satisfying was trying to be able to put it in words for me. I'm not always the greatest at that, but I like having other ideas and input, but then I like presenting it alone. So I didn't know how to put that in writing.
So it's kind of it's not a one off. It's just, you know, you're not a one labeled person, a single labeled person. Doreen, you got yours in there. Did you have a response to the activity?
Very hard for me to make my picture small.
So the technology aspect of it is a challenge, right? So there would that skill would be something you have to devise.
Sorry about that. It's when especially when something new. This is new to me.
Mm-hmm. Did anybody enjoy the discovery of it versus having me walk you through it? Did anybody enjoy the fact that you got to figure it out?
It was kind of nice. I learned by being forced, so it was nice to force myself to venture outside of a box sometimes.
Would anybody else have liked step-by-step directions? Raise your hand, use your reaction key and tell me if you would have liked step-by-step directions. Okay, Cecilia. If you use your reactions, I can see, even if you don't have your camera turned on, I can still see you. So that's, you know, so the reason that I did this is obviously to throw you into the deep end of the pool, because you didn't necessarily know how to use Google Slides in the classroom, but I gave you a very quick, you know, here's the text, here's the image, go for it. And it was more of an exploration task for you. And not everyone is going to be as comfortable with that type of a task. But can you tell me what different modes of learning would be involved in something like this? Go ahead and type in the chat. What are some different modes of learning that you would have had to put to use to do this? Visual and auditory, Brenda says. Anybody notice the spatial element
No.
in terms of getting the sizing of the pictures to, to be able to move it where you wanted it to go? There is a spatial element in there. Writing, Anna says, and Dana talked about the fact that writing, expressing what he really wanted to say was part of the challenge of this. There certainly was reading. You had to do reading, right? Because you had to
Yes.
look at the question. Now, if your learners were doing an activity like this, you're giving them multiple places to write. But then afterwards, they could be scrolling through to see what other people said. Go ahead and click on any of the slides. Just click on them and see that it doesn't change what I'm showing you right now. You can click on anything and it doesn't change what the teacher is showing the class. So this is a really great element of Google Slides, that students can work on it simultaneously without interfering with anybody else's work. And that's one of the reasons that we're going to work in Google Slides today. But another thing that I found out by doing this activity with you is that you're about evenly split in terms of those of you that wrote in here. You're about evenly split between teamwork and working alone. And that's an important thing for anyone, any teacher to know. But would we say that if we had students who like to work alone and students who like to work in groups, that we wouldn't ever have them do what they're less comfortable with? I mean, would you only have the students who like to work alone, and only have the students who work in groups?
No.
What do you think? Give me a Y, or there you go. Gemma's giving me a no. And that's really at the heart of what we're doing today, because you're asking about teaching to learning styles. But in fact, what we want to think about today is, and this is the workaround that I gave you earlier, what we want to think about today is, do we teach to learning styles, or do we know the way that learners learn, different ways that learners learn, and do we support their strengths and build their skills in areas where they're weak? So I know that a number of you that filled out the survey asked about, how do we help students know their learning styles? And that's something that I can give you some interest inventories and some different tests that learners can take. But really what we want to think about is, how do we teach really effectively across learning styles or across learning preferences? So there are 4 squares here, and I'm going to ask you to all open up your annotation tools. And I want you to mark with a check or an X or a star, anything you want to use, the goal that's most important for you today. And here are the 4 goals. Being able to understand the differences between learning styles and modalities and multiple intelligences, or helping learners identify and work with their strengths and areas of growth, or consider the role of multiple modalities when planning instructions, or create a task or activity that addresses different modalities. So I would like you to just put an X, a check, any kind of mark in one of these. I see that Brenda's marked an X in the differences between the terms. And just pick one. So these are our 4 goals for today. There are 4 outcomes for today. And Dana, I agree with you very much that challenging limits is about the growth mindset. So I should see 16 marks on here. And if you're struggling with annotation, let me know so that I can help you. Remember, if you're on a phone, okay, Linda, are you on a phone? Turn off your mic and let me know. Okay, so what you want to do is where you see you are viewing, I think it says CalPro, is that right, Vicki? I think it says CalPro up at the top of your screen. There is something that says view options next to that, and you click on that, and that gives you a downgrade
It'll say you are viewing Jamie Adelson Goldstein's screen.
Oh, okay.
And then just to the right of that is view options. Yeah.
Okay, so I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, we're short a few people. And remember that if you're on the phone, you're tapping at the bottom of the screen. It's a little different. If you've got an Android, no, Cecilia, I'm not going to give you remote control of the screen.
Jamie?
I think you maybe hit something by mistake. And Gemma, you're way out there, but that's okay. I think you're marking multiple modalities is what I think you're going for.
Wow.
I'm having trouble finding how to get to it.
Okay, so Anna, you're not on a phone, right?
Yeah, I am on a phone.
Okay, so what you got to do is right above that little bar that has the share screen and all of the little controls, tap above there and a pencil will come up. And then tap again and a whole bar of options will open up. So just tap. And if you can't find quite where to tap, kind of move your finger around, but it's on the left side you're tapping.
Found it before, now I can't find it.
Oh.
Dang it.
Okay, so Anna, you can just tell me 1, 2, 3, or 4. So, or upper right, upper left.
Upper right.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so this is an example. A couple of you asked about engaging learners, getting learners not to wait to be entertained, but getting them deeply into the task. This is a great way to do it in the face-to-face classroom. We can do 4 corners and we can have people go stand, which is nice and kinesthetic. Go stand in the corner that's most important to you, or go stand in the corner where you need the most help, or go stand in the corner that's your interest area. In this case, I gather data by having you mark the sign instead of stand by it. There's a kinesthetic element to it, especially if you're typing, a little less so, but still some. But definitely when you're making the marks, there's the kinesthetic connection. And if I look at the data here, well, I'll ask you, where do you think I am thinking the majority of the group wants to go? Linda just went everywhere. Linda's Neapolitan ice cream. Anybody want to just shout out? You don't have to turn on your camera. You can just turn on your mic. Well, my thinking is that this one, to help learners identify and work with their strengths and areas of growth, is a very popular one based on the data that I see here. And for those of you that are teaching English language learners, providing academic language like based on, according to, is great practice. But even for learners who are English speakers, native English speakers, that kind of academic language is really the language of power, testing, complex text. So even with an activity like this, we can show learners that they can take data, that they've used a kinesthetic response to get to the data, and then we can use more analytical thinking, higher order thinking to talk about that data. So that's just something to know. The other thing to know is that when you do this annotation, you have to clear it or it will come with you the whole way through. So for example, if I go to this slide, you see that all the annotations stay with me. I just cleared all the drawings. Could I get a thumbs up for those of you that have done jigsaw or paired reading in your classes? Go to your reactions and give me a thumbs up if you've done that. Reactions are on your meeting controls. So I see Linda has done jigsaw. Anybody else done a jigsaw or paired reading? I'll explain what it is in a minute. Jigsaw is when you divide one document into multiple parts and students are all responsible for reading one of the parts. Paired reading is when students read oh, thank you, Gemma. Paired reading is when students read different texts under the same topic and then teach each other about the different texts. The texts need to be fairly short. So what you're going to do is go into a breakout room at random, probably be 3 to 4 people. And the reason that we're doing it so small is because we have some students, some participants who are on the phone. And when you're on the phone, you want to be aware of the equity of how learners are in that environment. So on the phone, and Anna, this will be important for you to know if you don't, in order to see everybody in your group, you have to swipe left on your phone to see them. For the rest of you that are not on a phone, if you're on a tablet or you're on a computer or a laptop, you'll see everybody in your group. And could I get a Y in the chat? If you have, that's for yes. Do you have the handout that Michelle sent yesterday? Did you print the handout that Michelle sent yesterday?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So I see that some people say yes. Okay, good. There's more yes coming. That's great. Okay. Excellent. So what you want to do, if you have the handout, then you would open up the handout and look at the paired reading tasks, which are A, B, and C. And they look like this, A, B, C. And they have key detail questions. They have a, they have a question, they have the title, and then they have the text. And so what you're going to be doing is individually or with a partner, depending on how large your group is, you're going to read one of these each. Each team member reads one. And then you teach each other. So you work in your team. Each team member selects and reads a text about one term. You have to all cover all 3. So if there are 4 of you in the group, 2 of you are going to read the same thing. And you're going to find the answers to the questions. You've got 6 minutes for that. So this is great for the intrapersonal learner, the one who likes to work alone, right? This is giving you that time. If you had students who were struggling, you would pair them up so that they could discuss the answers. But in this case, I'm relying on you to find the answers in your text. The next step is for you to take turns teaching your teammate. And what you're learning about are the 3 terms: learning styles, modalities, and multiple intelligences. You'll have about 3 minutes each to teach about your term. If you have extra time, just discuss the information you found interesting or you're curious about. Linda, you're saying you don't have the capability of what? Of getting the handout? Of talking. Okay, then you'll need to use, let's see. Vicki, can we make sure that Linda goes into a group that has 3 people so that she's 4th, and that way she won't have to talk, but she can read the section and listen.
Yes, just one moment. Let me make sure that's the case.
And that's what the kind of thing that we have to do, right? The virtual learning environment, or VLE, if you like an acronym, is just that kind of constant flexing, potential for failure at every turn. And yet with every failure comes growth and excitement and something to talk about. Okay, so the process is going to be, you'll look at the readings, you'll make sure you know each other's names, because that's kind of important. You'll join your team. You can click on the link in the chat, which I'm going to put in, which is the handout, or use the handout. Choose your text. So for example, Doreen and Cecilia and I are in a group, let's say, and Doreen says, I want reading. Doreen, what reading would you want? A, B, or C?
A.
Okay, and then Cecilia says, well, I want reading B. B, and then, okay, it's left to me, I gotta take C. So that's the kind of conversation you're going to have in your breakout groups, but you're gonna have it very fast, please, no arguments. You're gonna read your piece and find the answers to the questions. After 6 minutes, I'm going to send a little notice into your group that says time to start teaching. But if you've finished, you can start teaching at any time. And the way you're teaching is you're using those questions. So when you see the question here, for example, what does a learning style describe? That's what you're going to teach your group. A learning style describes X. Let me make that a little bigger. So basically, you're going to answer these questions in your teaching, and you find the answers in this information in the text. So there isn't one inference that you have to make. It's all straight up evidential in the text. What questions do you have for me about the task? Yes, Trudy?
Nice. Can I see the task again?
Sure.
Okay.
Great. And I'll be joining you. I'll come in, and if there are any questions, you know, just like you do in the classroom, in the face-to-face classroom, you walk around to the groups and make sure everybody's okay. You have a total of 15 minutes for this task. So please stay as efficient as you can and on task. And I will send you off into your breakout groups now.
Okay, here we go.
Anna, remember to swipe. Welcome back. You're all muted. I'm going to ask everyone who can to please turn on your camera for a second. For maybe 3 minutes, 4 minutes tops. Thank you. I know it takes a little bandwidth, but it's worth it to see each other. Hi, Gemma. You look great. You look fabulous. Don't worry about it. So it is important to turn off the camera to preserve bandwidth, but it's also very important for the students and for building community to connect visually with the students. So that's one of the reasons that I ask, but also when we do this kind of a discussion, it's really challenging. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for turning on the camera. So I'd like to ask you to raise your hand if you're not on camera, like Linda and Sierra and Mariella and 3 Brendas. If you're not on camera, you can use the reactions, but otherwise, raise your hand if you got through A, B, and C readings. Okay, Gemma's holding up her hand. Oh, great. Raise your hand if you got through A only. A and B. Okay, great. So what that tells me is we need to have someone who read C summarize about multiple intelligences. So who would feel comfortable doing that for the group? Doreen's eyebrows went up.
I'll do it. I just talked about it. Unless Doreen, go ahead.
No, it's fine. You can do it.
Okay, Jennifer, you're up.
You're sure? Okay, I'm on. I just talked about it in my group, so I'll go ahead just quickly. And I have my notes, so I'm cheating a little.
There's
so
no
we read-
cheating. There's no cheating. That's a
There's no
resource.
cheating? Okay,
No.
so we read through the multiple intelligences. There's 8 of them: linguistic, logical, mathematical, spatial, bodily, kinesthetic, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalist. And these 8 intelligences are unrelated to learning styles. So I thought that was interesting. As an instructor, we should present our teaching in a variety of ways to try to attribute for all of these different intelligences, to bring out all of the students' unique capabilities. So there's different modalities you can do, such as illustrations, audio, such as podcasts, text, like some students prefer the text feature in chat, right, versus verbal. Some students may prefer verbal, collaboration, students who work independently. So it's really important to try to be aware of all of those different intelligences.
Round of applause for Jennifer. Great job. Great job. You can do that with the reactions. You can put up your little round of applause. Doreen, anything to add?
No, She covered everything.
What she said, right? What she said.
Yes.
Okay, well, this process that you followed is one of the ways to hit a lot of different learning styles and modalities and intelligences. And that's really why I wanted us to consider the fact that we don't want to teach directly to one learning style. We actually want to think in terms, learners can be aware of how they learn best, right? I mean, because that is something that a learner can believe, but we don't want to get stuck on labels. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a lecture, but I wanted you first to build your own background information with this paired reading. What did you learn about learning styles in the reading? Somebody who read A, tell me something you learned about learning styles. One thing you learned. I know somebody wanted to know what VARK was. Rudy, are you going to unmute?
Yeah, that was me. And there it was.
So what is
Visual.
VARK?
Visual, oral, verbal, and kinesthetic. So it's an acronym for all those things.
Yeah, and it's fun to say, VARK.
BARK.
All right. Yes, it is.
Now I'm going to put in the chat, I'm going to put, thank you for telling me, Brenda. I'm going to put something here because I know some of you did say you wanted to, learners want to know what their learning style is. So what's in the chat right now is a link to a quiz on learning styles. It has a lot of pictures. So those of you that are working with English language learners who might like having pictures in the quiz, this is another one about learning styles that has, it goes on for a really long time. This one is on multiple intelligences. This next one. It's from Canada. It's really nicely done. It's a great English language activity. Kind of lets you know what the learner's processing strengths are. And then this is actually something that you may have heard about already. This is called My Next Move. And this is an interest inventory towards careers. So those are just a few. I know a couple of you mentioned that you really wanted to have some ways for learners to self-assess. This is one way to do it. However, what we're going to talk about now is really what it means in terms of connecting these concepts, because it's really about our instruction and how we can be most effective. So I'd like you to take notes. I'm not going to force you into taking notes, but something that I think you want to be aware of is that in 2010, Parrish and Johnson did research about the transitional issues learners had going from adult education into academic programs like AA programs or career and training programs or bachelor programs, because they didn't have the skill of note-taking. And because unfortunately, in some ways, a lot of higher ed does rely or had relied a lot on lecture. So this is an example of a scaffolded Cornell notes where you prompt with the guiding question. So my question for you is, what's the connection between learners' differences and integrating multiple modalities in our instruction? And then the key concepts I'm going to cover, they're labeled there for the student. This is really something that the student who has a more logical, sequential way of processing appreciates, knowing that there's a sequence. On the right side is where the learner would write whatever details he or she comes up with. So that's part of the lecture. So I'm going to go through this lecture right now. You can kick it old school with paper and pencil if you like. You can just listen if that's the best way. If you're a little more visual and kinesthetic, you can doodle. But I am going to be asking you some questions when we finish. So you might want to consider focusing. And if you want to turn your cameras off, that's okay. This is a great time to turn off your cameras and you can feel that no one is staring at you. So we're going to talk about the myths and the truths, and we're going to start with the truths. So according to the researchers Reiner and Willingham, there are learner differences that we have to take into account. And for a long time, learning styles was the label for those differences. But Reiner Willingham put them in terms a little differently. So we look at their difference in capacity in different content areas. We look at their differences in interest, and we look at their differences in background knowledge. And this really has to do with brain-mind education, or mind-brain education. I always get backwards, mind-brain education. So these are considered true based on research. The myth that's important to know about is that 90% of teachers, when this particular research was done, believe that students learn better when they receive information tailored to their learning styles. But the research has shown that it's not true. And part of the reason is that the brain has interconnectivity. So the more places that we put the information in the brain, the more opportunity the brain has to process in different ways, the deeper the learning. Now, that doesn't mean, it's kind of, I make it sort of like horoscope, but it's actually a little more valid than a horoscope. A student can have a preference. My daughter is very kinesthetic. When she studies, she needs to move when she's studying something to retain it. That's a study skill that she has developed. I know that other people use colors when they study because that helps them, but that's a little different than how we learn. So let's think more about that. So the concerns are that we end up labeling the student, or the student ends up feeling that they're labeled. Daniel Willingham, and I'm quoting now, is from the University of Virginia, and he goes so far as to say that people should stop thinking of themselves as visual, verbal, or any other kind of learner. He says that nothing terrible will happen if you think that way. And if you buy into learning styles, nothing bad, but everyone is able to access different ways of learning. And so it's much better to think of everyone having a toolbox of ways to think. And then for the learner, the adult, the teacher, to think about which tool is best in this situation. So, I think if we think that way, we can really help our learners with the growth mindset. Because again, I grew up thinking I couldn't do math. And I kept reinforcing that belief because I'm a visual learner. I'm an auditory learner. I'm not a logical sequential learner. And lo and behold, when I had to teach my daughter algebra, I could do math. So we don't want to get people caught into the labels. When students use more than one medium to process a lesson, the learning is more deeply encoded. And being overly reliant on one perceived dominant learning style is a recipe for learning less effectively. So to think about that, we want to think about the principles of mind-brain education, because that's the research that underpins this. So the brain, everyone's brain is unique. Faces are different, brains are different. And some of the reasons brains are different is because there are different potentials, different capacity, different proficiencies, but this of course changes over time. Another reason the brains are unique is because everyone has different prior experiences and processes those experiences differently. So if our learners come into a text with no background knowledge, they're going to experience the learning about that text very differently than someone who comes in and has a lot of background knowledge. I know this is not rocket science for you to think about, but especially because we're thinking about complex text and really helping our learners move forward with their higher order thinking skills, we have to decide how much background information do we provide ahead of the text and how much background information is learned with the text. So these are questions that we have to ask in our instruction. In number 4, the constant changes in the brain, the neuroplasticity, I'm sure you've heard that expression before. I'm citing what someone else said, but your brain is different now than it was 5 minutes ago before we started the lecture. So your responses to what you hear, what you experience, mean that your brain is doing pruning and new connections. And in fact, that's number 5. The brain connects new with the old. So it makes sense that if you're going to really get that deep learning with the student, you're going to want to connect things that they know how to do already with new and challenging things. and that's going to create more connections, more neural pathways. So the new neural connections appear and they anchor new concepts to things that the learner already knows. And then last and certainly not least is memory and attention. And without memory and attention, there isn't any learning. So we have to think about, you know, what supports memory, what supports attention. And that's to some degree the learner's preferred style of studying. What will help them remember something? What will call a concept to their attention? However, the research shows that novelty is extremely important for building in memory and attention. And there's a dopamine experience with novelty. So when we do active learning, when we do spaced learning, meaning we do a spurt and then we do something else and then we come back and we revisit what we did, this all creates a more novel learning, more novel approach to the content, and the brain just loves that. So the thing that I really like sharing with you right now are the neural myths. So raise your hand with the reactions. You can raise your hand with the reactions. If you have heard right brain and left brain are a thing. Being right-brained or being left-brained is a thing. It's a myth. It's one of the for some reason it got, you know, it really got connected, and they've shown through all the research that you're neither right brain nor left brain. You may have a preference for one style, but that's no longer considered research evidence-based. Another neural myth. We use only 10% of our brains. Anybody heard that one before? A healthy person uses 100% of his or her brain. So yes, there could be a situation that would cause someone not to be able to use all, but I'm just gonna lower your hand so that so there could be a situation where someone is in a position they don't have 100%, but in general, healthy people have 100% of their brain. And I think there's one more that I have that I like to share. That brain growth, your brain growth pretty much stops after adolescence. And this is something adult learners really need to know is a myth. Your brain continues to grow well into adulthood. And in fact, you have pruning, and your brain isn't about new cells, it's about new connections. So if some cells fall away, but you're making new connections, your brain is still growing, just in a different way. So I think that's kind of positive and good news. I'm going to let you read this quietly to yourselves, especially those of you that like that interpersonal effect. Please type in the chat what this means to you as a teacher when you read this quote. Or if you are a data person, what this means to you in your life. If you're an administrator, what this means to you in providing professional development for your teachers. And if you'd like to say it on the mic, that's fine too. So Sierra, okay, I'm getting a lot. We need change to learn. Great. Variety is good. If we make the material interesting and engaging, students will get more out of it. Absolutely. And part of that engaging, right, Sierra, is making things that hit different modalities. Right. Novelty wears off. Exactly. The new thing can't be the new thing forever. By the same token, lots and lots of new things are not going to be supportive to the student. So routine is very useful, but shifting the routine, shift one element, that's enough for the novelty. Linda's great. Teaching in circles, cycles, same information in different ways with more input. Exactly. Great work. So we're going to step into making use of that lecture information by looking at a checklist that may help you plan with multiple modalities in mind. And I'm going to show you this. You have it in the handout. This is a checklist that's based on something that Sarah Lynn out of Massachusetts created, and I just added to it a bit. I want you to, if you've got the checklist, please look at it. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger too. There, that's much better. So if you have the checklist, I want you to just look through it. If not, if you don't have the checklist, I can give you a link and you'll be able to make a copy. This is something that is terrific to know about for your students. I'm going to show you that right now. So what you see at the bottom of my screen is a Google Doc link. And you'll notice that it says edit at the end. You see the word edit. If students work on a shared document, they can erase each other's work. There could be problems. But if you want the student to get the document and have it be that the document is perfect for that student and each student gets their own copy, then what you need to do is take off the word edit and just type in copy. And then what will happen is that you will be given the choice to make a copy of the document. So this means that instead of having to make personalized worksheets for every student, you can make one worksheet, change the link to say copy, and then students will have their own copy. So it's a time saver. But let's go back and take a look at this checklist. I'm going to have you choose, whoops, see, I did it and I forgot to clear my drawings. I'm going to have you choose your content area group to discuss the checklist for about 5 minutes. But before we do that, I want you to have some time to look at it. So everyone who has a copy of the checklist, go ahead and just peruse it. I'll give you 90 seconds just to read through. And for those of you who don't have a copy, I'm just going to move through this one every 30 seconds, or yeah, every 30 seconds, I'll move down to the next section. What we're going to do is ask you to choose a breakout room based on where you work or what's of interest to you. And I'm going to actually change the questions here because I'd like you to work on something a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and mask these questions that you see. And instead, I'm going to ask you to think about what do you wonder? What do you notice? Sorry. What do you notice? What do you wonder about on this chart for planning instruction in your area? And for those of you that are not in a classroom, I'd ask you to think about professional development and how these things would work in professional development. Let me make sure that I got the right size. Okay, so would you please write these questions down so you'll be able to refer to them in the in your breakout room? What do you notice? What do you wonder about looking at this chart for planning instruction in your area, in your subject area or with your learners? And I'll put these questions in the chat as well once you're in the breakouts. Actually, just before you're in the breakouts. Okay, I'm going to clear this so that we can go to the next slide. So make sure that when you get into your breakout group that you're with the people that you wanted to be with. And then ideally you would have these roles, but we're not going to do these roles today. But anytime you put your students in breakout rooms, it's important to have roles because again, this really works with the intra and interpersonal learner. It works for the verbal learner and the one who's less verbal, who likes to write. It also works for the student who really likes to lead. So you can think in terms of the manager might be the quieter person. Let the students choose their roles or assign their roles depending on the dynamics of your class. And this is what's going to happen. Vicki is going to start the breakout rooms, but what you're going to see on your, if you're not on a phone, Anna, this isn't true for you, I'll show you what's true for you. If you're on a computer, you're going to see down at the bottom of your screen, join a breakout room. And then you'll hover, and this is really important. You have to hover over, let me make sure I do this right. You have to hover over the right side of the screen in order to get that join. Don't click on the label, click on, so you see the label is lit up, don't click there, click over on the right to get join. And once you get join, then you'll be in a position to join the group. That's for the person on the computer. Notice that I'm providing multiple modalities for how to do this activity. I am telling you about it. I am showing you. And then you'll have a chance to actually do it. If you're on the phone, I know Anna is, I think one other person's on the phone. If you're on the phone, you're going to see this little image pop up that says join breakout groups. You click on it and then you see this list and you click join, whichever one you want to. What questions do you have for me before we send you into breakout groups?
I have a question. What if you end up being the only one in your breakout room?
Then what will happen is you can join another breakout room.
Okay.
Okay, so then because what will happen is that you can just go, it'll give you an option to join another room and you could click on that.
Okay.
Anybody else have a question? That was a great question, Anna.
And Jamie, you'd like this just to be 5 minutes this time, or
5 minutes, just 5
Okay.
minutes. What do you notice? What do you wonder?
just want to confirm? Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's start.
Okay, here we go.
That was fast. So one thing you noticed, somebody turn on your mic and say one thing you noticed about it. About the
It's
chart.
nice to hear I'm not the only one that struggles getting my students to always step outside of their comfort zones into different learning things. Like we had talked a little bit about, like having students trace words and stuff in the air. Like I couldn't get my students to do that if I paid them. So
They might trace if you put a picture up and you had to trace a particular type of picture, perhaps. They might trace. You could get them going on something that they that would capture their imagination, and then they could do the letters.
Yeah, we also talked about collaborating with a partner or collaborating with a team. And what I've noticed in my class is that if I have students who are of different nationalities, in other words, they have different native languages, then it works pretty well to put them to collaborate with each other in teams or as partners, because they're forced to speak English to communicate. Whereas if you have multiple people who have the same native language, then it a lot of times just kind of devolves into a chit chat in their native language, unless there is one person in the group who doesn't speak that language, and then they have to communicate in English. So
That's a great point. Another thing to be aware of is with task-based and project-based learning. If learners work in their first language on the task, but have to present about the task in English, then sometimes you can make that bridge. If you happen to work in a class with a class that is all homogeneous in terms of speakers, you don't have to have the same fight. They can use all their resources, but their end goal is that they have to produce English to talk about what the task was that they did. So amazingly, it pushes in a gentle way towards the language that they need to use, because they want to know, well, how am I supposed to say this? You know, so it gives you that support. Anything you wonder about based on what you read?
Hi, this is Michelle. I wonder for this group, for all of our teachers, what their learning styles are. As a way to choose curriculum, choose professional development. Brenda and I were in our breakout group together, and I called her, it was like a year ago, and I called her and I said, I need you to find this thing. And I'm like, all right, how does Brenda think? Brenda thinks in color, right? So things are color coded, things are a certain color. I'm like, I think it's a green folder and it's in this location, and it helped her find it. And not everybody thinks in color. So I do wonder about the teachers in the program as a way for them to get more out of professional development, or choose curriculum that they want to choose, or teach what they want to teach. So,
and part of that, Michelle, too, is processing, right? It's so different. So using the term learning style has, of course, this wide swath of interpretation. So, you know, how do they process information, but also how do they take in information? What's the way they take in information? And it sounds to me like you're talking about Brenda takes in things because she pictures them. But the way she processes it might be a completely different way, you know. So that's important for PD. It's important for any learning, right? To understand how you take it in versus maybe how you process it. And that's kind of the concept with taking notes when you're listening, because the idea of writing something versus just letting it, you know, walked over you, although some students might do really well with that. Great point, Michelle. Thank you. Anybody else wonder anything before we move on to our brain break? Well, I want to give you a brain break because you have been listening and thinking it's a 3-minute break. That's just how good I am. And we're gonna listen to some music. You can turn off if you'd like. You can turn off your camera and dance or not. 3 minutes. Okay, we're back. Please give me a Y in the chat if you are back with us. Hey, Sierra. Hello, Whitney. Hi, Cecilia and Katie. Hi, Doreen. Thanks for your camera. And Anna and Michelle and Trudy. if you look at the chat right now, you'll see that I put in a couple of, you have to scroll up. So maybe I have to do it again, actually, because I think it might not show up for you. Let me put it in. Let me put them in again. I'm going to put in a couple of links to tools. One of the things that we can do, because we're in this wonderful virtual learning environment, aka VLE, is make use of technology to help with different modalities. So you have that list, and a lot of you that I saw in the breakout rooms, you said, yes, I'm doing this, I'm doing it automatically. Maybe I haven't done this one. Maybe I should do a little more math. I haven't been thinking about calculate, but by and large, the list of options was not unfamiliar to you. What you may not be thinking of as much is some of the tech tools that will combine modalities for students and give them digital literacy and digital skills beyond maybe what they currently have, and create some challenge. We had quite a good challenge at the very beginning of this workshop with the Google Slides. So you would want to make sure that students were at least comfortable with the tools that you were going to work on. And much as we talked about, you know, which tool, which learning style am I going to target? Which modality am I going to target? Which intelligence for the learner is going to come to the fore, and which is going to really get bolstered by doing this? We don't want to use everything that's in the toolbox, but we want to pull as we can. So what I've done is created 2 flipped classroom moments for you. And what that means is that once we're done today, at any time in the next month or so, you can go on to these 2 sites, and I'm going to show them to you, and see what you could do with Nearpod or Padlet. Some of you may be using both. Would you put in the chat if you've used Nearpod or if you've used Padlet? If you've used both, put both. So while we're there, okay, Doreen's used Padlet, great tool. Very accessible on the phone, which is one of the reasons I like to use it with students, because as Anna has experienced, you know, not everything is equitable for the student experience on the phone and versus a computer. So it's good to find things that are. I'm going to show you the Padlet that I've created for you to work on, and just give you an idea of the different modalities that are here. So the learner can post one of these or all of these using different strengths. So in this case, there's the face, the place, the name, and the voice. And the student can take a picture, a selfie, and post it and write about the face or not. Take a picture of a place that they like, they feel good about. Write about the origin of their name. Really an important concept for our learners. Identity is so wrapped up with names, and microaggressions happen all the time with people not saying their names correctly and not bothering to say their names correctly. So this type of activity gives the student a lot of, it bolsters the student's sense of self, and then to be able to record. And Padlet allows them to do all this with relative ease off of, if they're on a phone, it comes right off of their photo roll. And the recording happens very easily right on Padlet. So I'm going to leave this for you to experiment with, and you'll have the link. Nearpod is a tool that allows you to set up slides and activities for students that you can do live, so they can be on the app and they can do that interaction with you, or they can do it as a student-paced self-access. And that's what you're going to be doing if you decide you want to follow up. And I'm just going to give you a quick peek to show you. Oh, actually, I don't want to do it that way. I want to do preview, because otherwise I'll ruin it. So what you'll see here is that this is a preview of what you will see and be able to do. So the student would click on the first slide to get information about what's going to happen. And then I'm asking you to review the lecture slides, but notice I've put in the notes. And then you would just go through the lecture slides. The student can do that. This is so easy to set up. And then you can ask an open-ended question. I'm not going to tell you what that question is. I can ask you to match. In this case, I'm asking you to match the text and the images. It's the multiple intelligences or the image and the text. And then there's a drag and drop or fill in the blank. And this is based on that quote that you read. Then I'm going to have you look at a video on differentiation. Take a poll. And then do some self-assessments if you want. So these are all clicks to web pages. So when I click here, you can't see because it's not being shared. It goes right to those different test sites that I put up for you earlier. So Nearpod is an example of how you can use a tech tool with something as auditory and somewhat visual, but pretty auditory as a lecture, and turn it into something that's much more interactive and that calls on all kinds of strengths on the part of the learner. What do you notice about Nearpod and Padlet? What do you wonder about Nearpod and Padlet? Go ahead and write your thoughts in the chat or turn on your mic. Linda's pointing out that it's great for interaction. And it's an intrapersonal interaction. If you think about it, you know, it's really like the learner using the chat, but in a way, but students get that opportunity to see what their classmates are thinking without being put on the spot. And I didn't show you the very last one, which is really the last part of Nearpod because I wanted to save that for you to see. But there's the very last step is really fun. So one of the things that you were very interested in is how we help our learners acknowledge and explore their strengths and how we make use of those strengths in the class and also bolster their weaker areas. So here's an example of a lesson, a unit, and I'm just going to read it to you. And I'm just going to, in this unit, pairs read background information about each other. They plan and conduct initial and follow-up interviews. They write articles about each other. The partners also write and exchange personal memoirs. The partners plan, propose, and take or locate digital photographs that reveal each other's personality and interests. So this is quite the project. Then they research the internet for facts, lists, and illustrations that demonstrate their partner's interests. All of this information is placed creatively on a poster, and each student presents his or her partner to the class. Now, I am sure that many of us have done something like this about, you know, interview your partner and tell us about what you learned. But you can see how many different pieces there are in this unit. When you take it out of the lesson and put it into a unit mindset, you're touching all kinds of skills. But maybe this isn't something, maybe this is more ESL and not so much ELA. So what could you do using the same template that would work in your content area? And that's the kind of thinking that we have to get to, is understanding that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we do want to see this kind of merge of modalities in a lot of different content areas for our learners. And this process could be novel because of what the topic is, not the process. So you can create differentiation around content, you can create it around process, you can create it around outcome. So the novelty can come on any three of those ways. And so if you keep the process, and for some of our learners, the process being routine is very helpful. But you give them the option to choose a different outcome, or you give them the option to do that process with different content areas, then you're really doing the multiple modalities approach. And in that vein, choice boards are a gift, because if we set up an outcome for our learners, like learners will make a poster, learners will write an essay, learners will analyze the data and write a summary. Those are worthy goals in a class and worthy outcomes, but it could be that we could really, really build on our learners' strengths and build their skills by giving them voice and choice. As long as what the outcome is still is proof of learning, we're not giving, but we're fostering the learner's agency. So let me show you a sample of a choice board. This choice board has a lot of different verbs in it. This is a choice board. Let me get a little larger. Oh, full screen. So with this choice board, you can see that the student has to pick at least 2 things to do. And the teacher has supported the student by putting links into the choice board so that the student, if they don't know what the form is for a cash flow statement, this is a financial literacy lesson, or if they don't know how to make a Google spreadsheet, that's in the choice board to help them. But this choice board gives the student the option to do things that total at least 10 points. So they're going to have to pick one from column A and one from column B for sure. Or they could do 2 from column B if that's what appeals to them. What modalities do you see in this chart? Please turn off your mic and say something that you see.
Definitely visual.
Okay, give me an example of where visual is.
Well, for instance, in the first one and the second one,
What about it is visual, Trudy, the first one?
because you're going to actually have a cash flow statement. You know, once you click on the form, you're going to have to actually add the information.
Mm-hmm.
And in the second one, you're going to have a poster. You're going to actually be able to see it.
Right. So in the form, you're not creating the form though, right?
No.
The second one, you're creating the poster. In the first one, you're calculating. It's definitely visual in that you're seeing the form. But there's, again, the difference between maybe thinking about the process, how someone processes it, and how someone produces, what the output is. So the input would be visual, and the output would probably be more mathematical, calculating for the first one.
Well, for the second one, making a podcast, that's verbal. The input is definitely verbal.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the output is also verbal, but it could also be visual.
Yeah. And imagine if you're making a podcast, well, first of all, there's collaboration, right? So you've got the interpersonal element, that modality is happening there. And you're creating a podcast, you're probably going to have to write it. You're going to have to write a script.
Unless you wing it.
Yeah, you can wing it. We can wing it. You're absolutely right. And that's a good possibility. But then again, they're going to look at, so here's scenarios that the students are looking at to be able to solve those problems.
Yeah, so they would have both, you know, reading and writing in that case as well as their input.
Right. So funny, my thing just flew away. So when you look at this choice board, it's a little easier to identify right away what you've got students doing as their main outcome. So that's why I'm going to ask you to think about this, think about doing this. And I'm going to, let's see what our time frame is. Yeah, I'm going to give you that when this is over, you have access to the to all the links, and you have access to the recording as well. So you'll have the link to these choice boards and to a blank choice board. And I'd like you to think about, as a follow-up to our work together, how could you take a topic that you're doing in your class, and how could you provide a choice board? Maybe it's just 4 squares. Maybe it's 3 squares. But how could you provide choice, which in itself is a great way of working with different modalities in your instruction to help your learners demonstrate proof of learning. And this fits in really well with task-based and project-based learning, but it also works with just a standard warm-up introduction, presentation, practice, evaluation, application approach. So you'll have a link to this page in the Google Slides to work with. So I'd like to take a few minutes to offer time for questions, and also to make sure we could revisit our goals, because that's really an important aspect of any web shop. So let's just remember what it was we said we were doing. So we were starting out to discriminate between learning styles, learning modalities, and multiple intelligences. And we did that through the paired reading activity, where you had 3 different texts on each of these terms. And in the best of all possible worlds, you would have all been able to teach each other the information. And if you're doing this with your learners, you of course want to give them plenty of time to do this. We did it in a very condensed time frame. But you can always look back at the material to become a little more solid on this point. Learning styles, maybe we don't want to use that terminology as much anymore. Maybe we want to think about learning modalities, given the research shows that learning styles may or may not be valid. Certainly the research tends to point away from them. But knowing VARK is certainly worth knowing about, because you'll see references to it. And you can certainly talk about it with your learners. Great topic for learners. We're going to consider the role of multiple modalities in instructional planning. We certainly had an opportunity to look at that chart. We also thought about, what do you wonder, what do you notice about what you're doing already with adding multiple modalities, and we talked a bit about how tech can support that. Exploring ways to help learners identify and work with their strengths and areas of growth. I gave you 3 different testing tools, self-assessment tools that you can use with your learners. They're also mentioned in the Nearpod. So if you go to the Nearpod, you'll be able to get those links very easily. And just by doing multiple modalities in your instruction, your learners are engaged in identifying and working with their strengths and areas of growth. And last but not least, creating a task or activity that differentiates for different modalities. We talked about it. Hopefully you'll be able to create it, but that's the choice board. And of course, you also have the checklist that you can use to combine. So I'll ask you to put any burning questions you have in the chat, and then I'd like to do the waterfall with you. We have all of 3 minutes, and we can do it. So if you have any burning questions, Otherwise, I'm going to put my email in the chat, and if something occurs to you in the dead of night and you think, I won't be able to sleep, Linda, I don't believe that they do the slides. AIR, I think, gives you the recording. Katie, you could confirm that, I think, in the chat if you want. But you will have the slides, the choice board, all the links to slides you'll have.
That's right. We'll provide the recording and we'll provide any handouts or links, but not Jamie's deck.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to do the waterfall technique, and I don't know if you know it, but it's one of my new favorite techniques. For learners that are on the phone, it's a little bit easier because we give them time to respond in the chat, so they're not busy trying to read the chat while everybody else is typing. And my question is, what's one tool, idea, or strategy that you heard or thought about today that you want to explore further or use? And then you're going to write your answer in the chat, but you're not going to press send or enter or return. You won't press any of those things until you hear the word waterfall. So what's one idea, tool, or strategy you heard, saw, or thought about today that you want to explore further and use in your use in your instruction? And now, because some people are not as happy with an auditory question, here it is visually. And that's just another modality. Waterfall. So now everyone's answers should come in. You should all be clicking enter, return. And what typically happens is that you see this waterfall of responses come in. That's why it's called waterfall. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. Great, Trudy. So you thought about that. That's absolutely a takeaway, thinking about it. And I would say think about moving from learning styles to modalities, because multiple intelligences are a little harder to teach boards, but modalities means that you are really you're really touching on all of the interests and needs of your learners. And Katie, I think you're going to close us out. You're mute, Katie.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Jamie. We really appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for attending and participating. We really appreciate it. And Vicki just popped a link into the chat, and that is the evaluation form for today's training, if you don't mind completing that. But thank you again, and I hope y'all have a lovely evening. And again, any trainings y'all are interested in the future, just let Michelle know and she will let us know.
Thank you.
Zoom wave. Thank you, Michelle.